Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Captain Tango and today's video will be a little bit different. I'd like to address the question I'm getting most often now, which is basically, how much did your cockpit build cost? Before we dive into this, I just want to take a high-level view of, in my mind, 3 different approaches to cockpit building. The first one is the do-it-yourself, DIY, which is basically starting with raw material, components, switches and panels, and leveraging skills such as woodworking, 3D printing, metalworking, electronic design to put together an amazing cockpit. Based on my experience with previous and smaller general aviation build, this is a very rewarding experience. A second approach is to actually purchase simulated parts, which you can connect then via USB or Ethernet to your computer, and the build becomes more a question of assembling things together. This is actually the approach I elected to use for my build. The third and last approach is to go for OEM parts, basically getting actual parts from an aircraft, be it an Airbus, Boeing, or other. You might have seen on the internet a picture or videos of people driving home with the nose section of an airliner. Then you have to kind of gut everything and rewire, and it's a long journey, but obviously it is as real as it gets. So now, looking at more specifically what you will implement in a build, there are several options that would ultimately influence the price of the overall build. Still, it is fair to say that a cockpit build will cost between $20,000 and upward of $100,000. So certainly not a cheap hobby. The first question I would recommend looking at is, do you intend to build a full cockpit with the 2 pilots position and maybe even the jump seat and fully enclosed? Or would you be happy with a single seat on the captain's side and an open frame? That will influence quite a bit the overall price. Next question would be on the visual system. Do you intend to use a curved screen with 3 or more short throw projectors, or do you plan to use TV screens? And maybe one of these would be sufficient for your initial build. Then looking at specific parts of the cockpit, the rudder pedals is probably the first place where I'll look, as these are kind of hidden and not used very often. So buying more of a traditional kind of gamer pedal set might be a cost-effective option. Now at the other end of the spectrum, you can have actual replica, you can have those linked together, the brakes linked together, and that would increase the price quite substantially. Looking specifically at an Airbus build, the side sticks is another option where different cost approach can be envisioned. You could start with a simple joystick and maybe a grip that reproduce the same look and feel and the same buttons that the actual aircraft has on the side stick. Similarly, the throttle quadrant can also be an option to reduce the cost. Personally, one of the areas where I was surprised by the price was the seats. I've seen people using simple car seats and coming with clever design to mount them on mechanical rails so that they can be moved, all the way to using the actual aircraft seats. I decided to invest in A320 replicas, and those are actual electric seats, which is really a nice feature in my experience. Now, beyond these various options, there is specifically the choice of the vendor that you might use. It is not uncommon that you can find half a dozen suppliers, and cost can vary quite a bit. You will have to consider shipping costs based on where you live and when is the vendor located, and then the taxes aspect can be an important factor in your purchasing decision. So when I look at the options I elected to use, overall my specific build ended up costing around $70,000. Now, I don't typically have $70,000 laying around. And in any case, I'm not sure I would feel comfortable investing such a large amount of money into my hobby. But at the end, it is indeed what I paid for my cockpit. So this has been many years in the making. I've been simming for more than 30 years, and I started small with just rudder pedals and a yoke, then added throttle and then build on and on from there. It was always my dream as a retirement project to build a full-size airliner cockpit. Personally, I decided to invest some money in a company coming with an IPO in 2012, and I was really lucky to see how that investment grew with time. I always had set that money aside and decided that whenever I retire, I will use that money as the investment for my cockpit. Obviously, this is by no means financial advice. Whatever you are comfortable with, I would encourage you to think long term. I understand that I was extremely lucky to see my initial investment of roughly $6,000 made in 2012 grow to become roughly the $70,000 that I needed to afford this wonderful cockpit. So one of my goals with this video is to encourage anyone who is interested in improving their cockpit to look at creative options, both in terms of implementing specific feature and funding your hobby. I hope to see you in a future video, and in the meantime, enjoy the virtual skies.